Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Product. Thank you for joining us today. So for those of you who are new here, Let's Talk Product is a community initiative organized by Propeller, a seed stage venture capital firm based out of Jordan, which invests in and supports founders during the early days of company building. Let's Talk Product is a platform where we host great founders and product leaders to share their journey and expertise in building products, software products. We're very excited to be hosting Ahmad Ibrahim today, the co-founder and CEO of NeoTax, who will be talking to us about product mindset. Ibrahim is a very talented thought leader in the field of product management. He's been building and managing products all throughout his career, whether as a startup founder, having founded 2 startups before NeoTax, or as an entrepreneur in residence at 500 startups, supporting and advising startups on product, and before that, head of product at Intuit. We'll make sure to leave a good 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. And Ibrahim, thank you once again for joining us today. The floor is all yours.
All right, thank you, Lean, and hello, everyone. Nice to meet everyone. Yeah, so I have a bit of a presentation, but I'll try to keep this as casual and as informal of a conversation about product, and I'll try to make it in such a way where, irrespective of everyone's backgrounds, this is hopefully a relevant and productive conversation around product. I'll briefly say, so I believe product is a mindset more than it's a specific function or role at a company or at a startup. And we'll talk about what that means. But specifically, one of the things that I think is important about taking note of the fact that product is a mindset is that it's not just a product manager's job to think about product and to think about customers and being customer-centric and customer-minded. It's really up to the entire organization. And there are things that if everyone sort of thinks about and embodies, can orient the entire startup, the entire company, the entire organization to be product-minded, and frankly lifts a big burden off of the product manager because they're no longer having to steer the entire ship. Everyone is on board with the thinking and this mindset. So a bit of my background. I studied philosophy and economics. I worked in finance, and then I did a bunch of startup-y tech stuff. I started a company with some friends, which was a CFO app for small businesses. I joined Intuit in a product role where I built and launched a product from scratch, which was kind of a nice experience. At larger companies, you typically don't get that kind of experience. Intuit is sort of the #1 financial software company in the US. They make TurboTax and they make QuickBooks and a number of other products, but those 2 are the most famous. I worked on QuickBooks when I was there. And then I started a coffee company with another good friend of mine. And then I left that and was head of product at an HR tech startup in San Francisco. The same time that I was the head of product at Teamable, which is this HR tech startup, I was also entrepreneur in residence with 500 startups, where I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, which ended up becoming NeoTax, which is what I'm doing now full time. That time that I spent with 500, my family and I actually lived in Cairo, Egypt for a year. So I was born in California, lived here my entire life, but it was my first time living in the Middle East, and we lived in Egypt for a year, and I got to meet dozens and dozens of startups in the Middle East, and mainly helping their founders of these startups think about product and build product roadmaps, and then reorient the metrics of the company around that product roadmap, reorient the organizational structure around that product roadmap, and really get everything to be hyper aligned with the customer incentive and the customer benefit. One of the things I noticed when I spent that time in Egypt and sort of more generally around the Middle East is that there weren't that many product managers, and product was a function that was sort of lagging a little bit. Great software engineering, great entrepreneurial mindsets, great design, but often not that many people in product. And so one of the things that we thought about with a lot of these founders was, how do you identify the individual or the individuals within your company that you can mold into becoming product managers, And then to make that person's job easier, how does the rest of the company embody this product mindset so that we're all moving in the same direction, instead of just having this one person that we identify and making him or her in charge of product. And then they have a huge task of not only figuring out what the roadmap is, but convincing everyone else to think this way. So if we can get everyone to think around the same sort of, have that same product mindset, it makes everyone's job a lot easier. And now I'm currently started a company called NeoTax. It's a seed stage company automating taxes for small businesses. You'll see more about it because I'll try to use examples. I think personally, I think it's useless to talk about like theory and all this theoretical product stuff. And so most of the conversation will actually be in product examples from my time now at NeoTax. And before that, we have an example from my time at Teamable. And they both are trying to demonstrate two very different things. But I think it's most useful if we talk about product principles live in a real product in action and seeing what the trade-offs look like. Because it's always easy to think of things in a vacuum, but it's difficult once you're actually in real life. So I'll try to make those examples as real life as possible. But just to frame things, often these two roles, product and project managers, get conflated or confused with one another. And so this is a definition that I got from productplan.com. They have some free tools for product managers. I've never used them, but they have this definition, which is that product managers drive the development of products. They prioritize initiatives and make strategic decisions about what gets built. I mean, whenever people ask what product managers do, I always say they figure out what we need to build in the first place and then rally the team around building it. Project managers, on the other hand, are often overseeing the execution of plans. So they're critical to the success, specifically in larger organizations, larger companies. But often there's less of the developing of the plan and the strategy, and there's more of like, how do we execute and make sure that we actually that we actually deliver. So just one disambiguation before we start. The primary objective of the product manager, but also the startup, is achieving product market fit, which is obviously the holy grail of startups. It's kind of the single make or break it metric, right, for how well or how poorly startups can execute or whether they survive or not. And the product manager does this by being the customer advocate within the organization. What does that mean? That means that at any given time, if we're a company of 10 people, of 20 people, of 50 people, we're sitting around a room and we're like, I wonder if the customer wants us to do X or Y. The product manager should be the best positioned individual in that room to answer the question. They sort of like close their eyes and like assume the role of the customer, and they are the customer inside the company. And so it's almost like they've done enough customer interviews and customer research interviews that at any time, they know exactly how the customer would feel, would respond to, would want, would not want any of the things that the company is discussing. And so they are the voice of the customer, as other companies call it, within the company. And they should have the authority to do that, not because the CEO gave them authority or not because they are the CEO. They should have authority because they have just done so much. They know the customer so well, that they have the authority by influence, by competence, by actually knowing the customer very, very well. This is sort of like my own take. This isn't, that a startup is sort of like a living organism and it's growing. And two of the attributes that define this living organism, this startup, are that it's fundamentally risky. It is, I mean, from a finance perspective, it's the riskiest asset class that exists, or one of the riskiest. But it's also a learning, growing organization, sort of fundamentally speaking. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to maximize learnings. I had an investor once tell me that they measure founders by their learnings per dollar. If I give you 100 grand, what have you learned by the time that you've spent $100,000? And this is important because startups are basically charting new territory. They're doing something that has not been done before or has not been done yet. And so there isn't an expert out there that can answer the question, what happens over here or what happens over here, because nobody's gone there before. And so the startup that will win, the startup that will conquer this space and this space and this space, is not the one that gets there first, is the one that learns the fastest, adapts the fastest, and is able to win and succeed. So learnings are very important. And then you're minimizing risk. We said like it's a fundamentally risky entity. And so how do you at every moment take out as much risk as possible? And so at every milestone, you think, what is this de-risking? What are the risks that this is mitigating? Let us mitigate the biggest and most important risks first, so that if it's a 95% risky living organism, it becomes 90 or 80. So if there's something that's like causing 15% risk and everything else is causing 5% risk, mitigate that 15% risk first. I mean, I don't think there's an easy way to quantify, but I'm just saying, if you think about it as, let us try to mitigate the biggest and the most important risks first. And so you're maximizing the learnings and you're also maximizing risk mitigation. So oftentimes I struggle to sequence this presentation because I have two examples and they both feed one another. And so there's some things that I'll talk about within NeoTax that inform the next example, but there's also quite a few things in the next example that help understand where to start. So just so you have an idea, this first example is about where to start. The second example from Teamable will be about how to adjust course along the way to account for the things that you're learning. And as you'll see, when we talk about how to adjust course later, there are some mistakes that you're trying to correct later that you're like, man, if I had just started a certain way, this would have been easier. So that's kind of how they influence one another. And I'll give you the cheat notes at the, one of the conclusions is simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Start with as simple a thing as possible because it becomes much easier to correct course later. If things are already very simple, if they're complex, then you have to chop away a bunch of features and you have to kill a bunch of functionality, and no customers love that. So we're automating taxes. Taxes are tricky for a number of reasons, but one of them is you can't just build like this hacky, scrappy, startup-y, lean startup methodology kind of way of getting into the space. Taxes have to be very robust. They have to be very accurate. They have to be fully baked. They need to be end-to-end, meaning what this means is, and this is at least in the US, I'm not sure how it works. And frankly, I don't think anyone pays taxes in Egypt at all, but so I have no idea how it works in other parts of the world, but at least in the US, if this is the entire tax process and I automate most of it, but not all of it, if I automate 70% of it, and I say, okay, customer, I've automated 70%. Take this and go to your accountant and they'll finish the rest. The customer will say, well, what the hell? If I still have to go to my accountant, what's the point? Like I'm not interested. One, my accountant's gonna get mad at me that they could have done that part, that I used someone else to do it, but you're still making me go through the pain of going to an accountant. If I'm gonna go to an accountant, I might as well have them do the whole thing. So it's very clear that you have to solve it end to end. And so this makes it tricky. The question becomes, what is the smallest possible tax filing that we can ship end to end and with high quality? Because like I said, it can't be scrappy or hacky, it has to be very robust. And so that's kind of what guided our search for where do we even start. Now, we decided that there were some principles that defined how we search for that small chunk that we can start with. And we said, okay, we want something and we defined the priorities as well. And this is something that I thought was annoying when I was at larger companies like Intuit. I always thought how annoying that we have to prioritize our principles. And this is all big company stuff, but it's not. There are a number of very different things that we could have done if we just flipped 3 and 4, or if we flipped 2 and 3, or if we flipped 1 and 3. Sequencing and ordering these things made a huge difference in what we actually ended up deciding. So portability means something that if I complete it and I automate it for the customer, they can take that and go with it anywhere. It doesn't rely on another accountant having to interface with it. It's discrete enough where it can be in its own wrapper and you can take it with you wherever you go, portable, meaning it integrates and plays nice with any other piece of your taxes. So if you're doing your sales tax and your employees' taxes, and each of those is portable enough, is contained enough that you can have a different person doing it without upsetting the rest of your stack, of your tax or accounting stack. That was most important because we had to do something end to end. The second is if you're going to build automation, you need data. You need to acquire data first. So data acquisition was number 2. The third was we wanted it to be a great customer experience. This is at the heart of sort of product management in general. In our case, because we were just starting, it was number 3 and not number 1. And then we also wanted it to help us acquire customers. I think the experience is more important than growth and acquisition. And then finally, revenue. If we had prioritized revenue as the number 1, you would have seen a very, very different set of things that we would have done. And we actually decided that this is where we draw the cut line. The most important are 1 and 2. The rest, not as critical, which is very hard to do. I mean, you're looking at this and thinking, what the hell? How is customer experience under the line? But as a startup, the whole point is you have to make very difficult trade-offs, and you have to understand the nuance between these different trade-offs. What this ended up being, and sorry, this is not a very easy slide to understand, but I just took it straight from our deck and made it easier for me to prepare this presentation. But what this meant for us is that we launched something called the R&D tax credit. Now it's a small filing, it's not very big, but we used it to acquire data that we needed. And so the 2 things underneath there, QuickBooks, which is an accounting software, we have accounting data, and Gusto, which is the number 1 payroll provider for small companies in the US, for startups specifically in the US, give us access to payroll data. So we got data acquisition, accounting data, and payroll data. And we did this R&D tax credit, which, like I said, is a very small filing. Now that data allows us to build automated taxes for startups. We started with startups because, I don't know if you know this, but most startups are not profitable, and so they don't pay any taxes. So it's kind of an easy tax to start with. And we know how to acquire startups. They're early adopters. They usually have lots and lots of data. Maybe it's not organized, but that's okay. They're very data heavy. So acquiring lots of data about them would be easy to allow us to automate. And then we would move into automating taxes for Shopify e-commerce stores. And again, they have lots and lots of data. They're somewhat tech early adopters. They have profits. And so we actually need to get their taxes, make sure that it's super accurate. But sort of data has informed the progression and the road mapping of how we're doing this. And then we keep doing more and more of these verticals. So after Shopify, we do others and others. And eventually this brings us to our vision of being the data layer for small businesses. And we think with that data, you can build lots of other really great, really valuable products and services. So it sort of gives you like starting very small, but how each step is accretive to the next step. There's a lot of things that we can say about product road mapping. In general, this isn't on the slide, but in general, the way that I typically like to think about it and like to tell other founders to think about it is that along this journey, you're also, if you remember what we said earlier, you are maximizing your learning. So how are you designing experiments along the way, along each of these steps? How are you designing experiments to maximize your company's learning at every single step? And number 2 is you're mitigating risk. At every juncture, what is the largest risk mitigation that we can possibly do? So in the beginning, it was like, will people go to a computer instead of having the human file your taxes? So we mitigated that risk. Do people trust giving access to such sensitive data to a software, to a startup that just started? Yes, we mitigated that risk. The next risk that we have to mitigate is, can we actually file entire income taxes? And so we picked the easiest possible income tax filing to do to mitigate that risk. And then the next risk would be, well, you've done it for this easy case. Can you also do it for a more difficult business case? So then but that risk is smaller than, can you even file taxes in the first place? So first you answer the question, can I even file taxes in the first place? You mitigate this risk. And then you mitigate the next risk of, okay, so you did an easy one. Can you do a harder one? That's substantially easier than doing it in the first place. And then the risk of, well, if you've done 2, you guys, if I came to everyone here and said, hey, I automated taxes for these set of companies, and then I moved on to these set of companies, you have less skepticism that I can do 5, 10 more. You're like, okay, this guy's done 2, looks like he can do another 2 or 5 or 10. Okay, I have little doubt that they can continue to do this. So that's kind of how you think about risk. And then, like I said, the learning, what have we learned along the way? Now, so we said that portability and data acquisition were 1 and 2, right? If you remember here. The next was a customer experience and then customer acquisition. So customer experience, for us, it was important that automation is not just a cool science project. It's not just like, hey, can we get some machine learning people in a room and do a cool science project? It also doesn't just mean that because you've automated something, you can make more money. It's important that it translates into a 10x better customer experience. And even though we started with a very small thing, a small chunk, this small R&D credit filing, which even if you don't know what it is, my point is that it's a tiny, tiny piece. It's not the entire tax automation. But on this small chunk, we were able to validate and demonstrate some really important thesis. One is that, yes, we were able to do something fully automated, and guess what? It was even more accurate than when a human does it. That's just what happens when computers handle numbers. Computers are very good at dealing with numbers. The next thing is that most humans do this task in a few weeks. Our product does it in 15 minutes. It's a paradigm shift in experience, right? Something takes a few weeks, now it takes 15 minutes. It's significantly faster. I'm not saying I cut it down from 5 days to 3 days. It's a paradigm shift. And the next thing is that most humans charge 20% of whatever refund or money that these companies get back. We charge 5%. So we can be, again, much, much cheaper, much faster, and more accurate. So it's important that all of these things that you're doing translate into a better customer experience. And that should be the #1 metric. And we'll talk about metrics towards the end, but your metrics should always be tied to customer experience. And then our early customers frankly told us, hey, this is amazing. Can you take over the whole thing? Like, I know you guys started with a small chunk. Can you take over the entire stack, the entire accounting and tax stack? And that's important because when we talk to investors, or even when we talk to ourselves, are we building something that customers want? Yes, customers have told us, this is amazing. Can you do it for everything else? And we actually had a few customers that wrote angel checks and invested in the company. So this is just, sorry. This is just early. This is an outdated slide. This slide is from 2 months ago when we had just launched for 1 month. But in our first month, we did over 100K in revenue. The product was #1 product of the week on Product Hunt. We had over 50 customers, and customers, most importantly, really liked it. People loved the experience. We had 5 customers that wrote angel checks and invested in the company. They're not big checks, but that wasn't the point. The point was, do customers like what you're building? Yes, they invested. Like, they loved it so much, they invested. And so that was very, very important to deliver that customer experience. And then, like I said, #5 is revenue. So revenue, even though on this slide is the first thing, because we were talking to investors when we made this slide, and that's something the investors care about, I could have cared less. If I gave this product away for free, that would have been fine with me, because we just need to acquire the data and deliver a great customer experience. Now, this is a second example from my previous company that I was consulting. For less than a year, I was head of product, and we sort of navigated a shift and a pivot in the company. And then they went on and raised their next round, and that's when I stepped away. But this was important on how to adjust course. So Teamable is a recruiting and hiring software. What they basically do is they allow the company to they allow all the employees of the company to connect their social networks, and it creates a big social graph of everyone that everyone is connected to. So sorry, it creates a social graph of everyone that the employees are connected to. And so when you say, hey, we want to hire a marketer, it'll show you all the marketing people that are in the company's network. And it's like, oh, this person looks great. Oh, Hala is connected to this person. Hala, can you connect us to this person? And Hala will either say, yes, I'd love to, or no, that person's actually an idiot, you shouldn't hire them, or whatever. But Hala will know whether this person is good or not. And also, inversely, this person will likely respond if Hala reaches out, because this person knows Hala. So one of the things that I started with, the company was sort of, had some customers that had a great experience, others that were churning. It was a bit of a mess. And so we started with going to the source of understanding our customers very, very well. And we said this earlier, it's important for the product manager to be the voice of the customer, to be the advocate of the customer inside the organization. And so we started with understanding our personas. And in human-centered design, which is a prevalent design thinking framework these days, at least, who knows, things always change. It basically tells you to take all of your research, all of your surveys, everything that you've seen, all the trends, patterns, insights, customer research, interviews, everything, and you manifest it into a persona. And what that looks like is you build this empathy map sometimes to understand your persona. You give them a name, you give them an age, you make up quotes, or maybe you use quotes from your customer research interviews. And you say, like, you know, they're, for example, demographics, they have 2 years of internship experience, they're looking for a full-time position at a nonprofit. You really start to flesh out, even you can say things like, hey, he's living with his parents because he just graduated, but he wants to move out. And these are the things that motivate him. And this is what keeps him up at night. He's stressed out. His stress points are, he needs to repay his student loans, for example. And he doesn't want to spend too much time looking for a job. So like you really build an empathy map that helps us understand Henry and understand this persona that we built. And that's critical to, it's definitely step one. Before you start anything else, before you start thinking about features or designs, who the hell are you building these features and who the hell are you designing this for, right? And so we're designing it for Henry. He's 21 and he needs a job before his student loan payments begin, and he needs to move out of his parents' house, and he doesn't want to spend too much time stressed and worried about finding a job. Okay, we know Henry. We feel like Henry's our friend and we can build a product for him now. And so in our case, I translated it into, okay, we have several personas for Teamable now. We have the hiring manager, Michael, who's hiring 2 senior engineers. We have the employee, Steven, who has lots of engineering friends. We have the recruiter, Celine, who finds lots of candidates on the internet for the hiring manager, who's Michael. And we have the buyer, Aboud, usually the CEO of the company, who makes a decision whether to pay for Teamable or not. For reference, Teamable costs $15,000 a year. Some customers are paying up to $200,000 a year. So just to somewhat of a pricey investment. So the CEO usually had to make the decision about whether or not to buy the product. Now, currently, the product was built around solving for the recruiter. But we discovered very quickly that the recruiter actually doesn't have the authority to drive behavior within the company to get everyone to use the product. They also don't have the authority to force or maybe gently ask employees to connect their networks. So wherever you work now, imagine someone saying, hey, we're using this new tool. You need to connect your Facebook and your LinkedIn and your Twitter so we can see who your friends are so we can hire them. You're already kind of feeling iffy about it. If someone in HR tells you, hey, you need to connect, hey, I'm sending you a second reminder, a third reminder, you may not be very compelled. Now, if the recruiter goes to the CEO and says, hey, CEO, we need to buy this product, CEO's like, why did I hire you? Like, your job is to do this. I don't need to buy this product to do this. And then finally, the recruiter is unfortunately not the ultimate decision maker on whether this person is a good fit or not, and doesn't ultimately make the decision about whether to hire this candidate or not. So we discovered something interesting. We discovered that actually the hiring manager should be the epicenter. The hiring manager is best positioned to drive behavior. The hiring manager says, hey, I'm hiring 2 engineers. They're going to join your team, Mohammed. Mohammed, I need you to connect your LinkedIn, because at the end of the day, wouldn't it be great if this person that we hired came from your network? And then they're going to work on your team. I'm sure you want them to be someone that you know, or someone that you're connected to, or that you know someone that's connected to them. And you're on my team, you report to me, so I'm going to please ask you all to connect your networks. They have much more authority, or they're better positioned to ask people to connect their networks. And then if the VP of engineering or director of engineering tells the CEO, hey, I need this tool because I need to hire more engineers, that's it. The CEO doesn't even ask how much it is, it's done. And finally, the hiring manager is the one making the decision about whether to hire. They're the largest beneficiary. So we needed to reorient the entire company. We needed to reorient the entire product around the hiring manager, which is a very different set of needs. So you do an empathy map for the hiring manager, empathy map for the recruiter, and they're actually quite different. And their incentives are different, and what they care, how much time they have is different. The VP of engineering is building code and shipping features. The recruiter's full-time job is to recruit people. So they're fundamentally different personas to build product for. And the ideal experience differs for each of them. The employee just wants to connect their networks, and then if the hiring manager says, Hey, Muhammad, can you please connect us to your friend, Ahmad? The employee just needs to click approve or not approve or whatever. So it's a fairly lightweight experience. The hiring manager needs to create the job, needs to see the candidates, needs to approve the candidates, needs to make sure that the introductions are sent to these candidates. The recruiter coordinates the interviews, and the buyer, the CEO, we need to send them a monthly report showing how many people that you're hiring, how much money was saved, how much time was saved. Now, guess what? It only needs to be a sticky and engaging experience for the hiring manager. And for everyone else, it needs to be a minimalist experience. And we'll talk about minimalism at the end, but like the simpler you can make everything, the better you will be served. So just really minimalist experience for everyone else. You can sort of see how everything is starting to reorient around just the hiring manager. And you can actually start sketching out what the ideal experience would be, even if this is something that we won't be building for the next 3 to 4 years. It'll take us a while to get there. But when you think about your product roadmap and your vision, you want to actually start mocking up and wireframing and designing what the vision looks like physically, tangibly, and show it to the whole team. Say, hey guys, in 5 years, in 3 years, in 2 years, this is what we want our product to look like. And everyone just becomes instantly aligned and on the same page about what that looks like, and start understanding how do we need all these stepping stones, these pieces along the way in the roadmap to get us there. So we define this ideal experience, and this is me just sort of making this in PowerPoint. They didn't even use InVision or Balsamic or XD, just like really basic, just communicates, hey, create a job, 5-7 years, experience, full stack, I don't know, San Francisco or Amman. And then you get a list of top 10 candidates. These are all the people that we think are the top 10 fit. And you say, yeah, I want to get an introduction to all of them, please. And it'll go off to it'll send a note to each of the people, the person that's connected to John, the person connected to Stacy, the person connected to Firas, the person connected to Farah. It'll send to each employee that's connected to these people, it'll just send a note, hey, Ibrahim wants a connection to Stacy Appleseed. Can you connect them? And they say yes or no or whatever. And then that's it. We would like the experience to be that simple. And so you mock this up, you show it to the company gets fired up, everyone gets excited. Yes, we need to build this experience. Now you have buy-in to do all of the other steps that get you there. So how do you get there from where you are now? I think this is just an important lesson, not super related to everything else we said, but oftentimes if you have early success in a startup, the things that got you here won't get you there. So the set of activities that initially got you the success that you have are not the same set of activities that will get you future success in the next stage, in the next milestone, in the next phase of the startup. So there are certain number of activities as a seed company that are different from the Series A company activities that are different from Series B company. And that's also why you hire different people here versus here versus here. That's why the CEO is initially, or the CTO rather, is initially writing a bunch of code, and then they're hiring, and then there's different sets of activities. That's important to note, especially if you have some early product success or early traction. Sometimes you need to change what you're doing because the things that got you early traction are not the same things that will help you scale the business, for example. And I sort of gave an example of this, but the roadmaps should be elegant and logical. The entire team should feel like, yes, this makes sense to me. I understand why step 1 takes us to step 2, and how step 2 helps us build step 3, and how step 3 is accretive to step 4. So all of these things need to be, I like to think of them as elegant, but logical is sufficient. And they need to take into account sequence versus priority versus urgency. There are some things that are very urgent, but they're not a priority. There are some things that are not a priority, but we have to do them first to be able to do the priority. That's interdependencies, for example. So it needs to take all these things into account. And it's okay if you put something that's more urgent or more sequentially first before a priority. That's okay, as long as you are fully aware that you are doing it and fully aware of what the trade-offs are when you do that. The next thing is to be designing experiments along the way. So we said this earlier, where along the way I have a learning plan. The learning plan tells me this is what I'm going to learn here, this is what I'm going to learn here. I'm going to design an experiment here that gives me the data to be able to build the next piece. One of the ways you can do this is to work backwards. To build step 3, what are the answers that I need? I need answers to these 5 questions. Okay, now let's go to step 2. How do I design experiments in step 2 to give these 5 answers so that we can build step 3? It's one of the ways to think about it. And then finally, take your team into account. You can't just be like, okay, team, we're gonna build this vision. It's gonna take 5 years. For the next 5 years, it's gonna suck. We're gonna work our asses off and it's gonna be painful and we're not gonna have any successes. But we're just, everyone heads down. There's light at the end of the tunnel. That light is in 5 years. Half the team will leave, 90% of the team will leave. So take your team into account. What are some things that you can release along the way that give validation, that build more conviction in the team, that are wins that the team can feel excited about, that the team can feel pumped about along the way? This goes back to sequence versus priority. If you want to optimize morale as well, you need to say, okay, this thing isn't the #1 priority, but let's ship it first because it'll get the team really excited because either it's a cool feature or it's going to give us customer validation that the team really needs to be able to have better conviction to keep going. So you want to take motivation and productivity into account. You also don't want to be highly disruptive. There are companies that are schizophrenic and like, okay, this is the priority. No, everyone stop doing this. Let's do this instead. Okay, I know we said I'll do this. Let's roll this back. This was all throwaway work. If people are doing throwaway work and they're constantly being shifted and schizophrenic, it's not very productive. So for Teamable, we said, okay, we want to simplify the product. But even though simplicity is priority #1 and then power and then growth, we decided that you can't simplify something until you've made it more powerful first. So even though simplicity was #1, the sequence suggested that power should come first, because once we make it powerful, then we can simplify. What that looked like in real life, so this is now slides directly from my Teamable product vision slide when we were shifting things, is that, and I'm just going to do a time check. I forgot to bring my phone, so making sure. Oh, wow. We're pretty, I've been talking forever. Okay. I'm going to gloss over this a little bit. I'm sure we can share out the presentation, but I'm going to speed through a little bit. So even though simplicity was #1, we sequenced power first. We talked about what all the things that needed to happen for all of these different steps. And we built a learning plan along the way. And then we started to dig deeper and deeper, and I'm not going to spend much time here, but my point is that this same framework can go super deep and you can create more and more detail here. So we said, okay, this is what this needs to look like, the powerful part. And then we started to dig into detail. Okay, what does exactly this hiring funnel look like? How do we build a recommendation engine for it? And then we went into the recommendation engine. These are all the features that recommendation engine needs to have. These are the target attributes. These are the weights. So you can get very detailed, even though but it all ladders up to this high level framework that the entire company is aligned to. How do we make it simple? We said, hey guys, this is the current experience. There's a UI that's on top of some backend and integrations. But the UI was not very simple. It was very confusing. People got very confused. Step 1, make it more powerful. So add this machine learning and data layer to the bottom, sort of the back end of the product. And then we add a totally separate, simple dashboard on top. And we keep the current experience as it is. I don't want to disrupt things if people already somehow know how to navigate this complicated product. And then you hope that people spend 80% of their time on the dashboard and 20% of their time in this mixed up product. And then you try to make it 90-10. Then you identify the 10%. When people leave the dashboard and go into the complicated product, where are they going? What are the things that are in the complicated product that we obviously didn't have in the dashboard? Oh, it's these things. Can we bring these things into the dashboard? Okay, let's start killing off other pages. Let's start killing off more pages. Let's just get rid of this whole thing, because now most of everything people need is in the dashboard. And here we go. Simple, powerful. So if you remember simple and powerful, we now have simple and powerful. Now we feel good about the product. Now we can start investing in growth. Yeah, so we couldn't kill the pages unless we made it powerful first. Because think about Tesla, and they have the steering wheel. They can't get rid of the steering wheel until they perfect self-driving functionality, right? And so if 95%, and what's their criteria? They have to be data-driven. If 95% of users don't touch the steering wheel, that's when we remove it. So they keep running tests. They see how often people have to touch a steering wheel, and then they eventually get rid of it. I'm going to skip this. The important thing here to note is just the bottom piece, which is focusing on a singular customer metric. And you only build something if it increases that metric. The metric should align with the customer. It shouldn't be revenue. That aligns with your own interest. What is the customer metric that customers want? What do they care about? Do they care about how many referrals or how many interviews they do? No. They care about whether they hire people or not. Okay, then make that your metric. And then what are the input metrics that go into whether they hire people or not? Those are the levers that we have as a company, the variables that we can manipulate to maximize this customer metric. And I'll tell you something. If you maximize the customer metric, revenue will come, traction numbers will come, metrics will come, growth will come. But you have to solve for the customer. The problem with this singular customer metric for the customer metric is that it's often a lagging indicator. So you need to have input metrics that are leading indicators that, one, are actionable, you can manipulate them, and two, they give you an early sense of whether or not you're tracking. Now this is the last slide, biggest takeaway and learning here, at least from the second part, is reductionism, simplicity. Don't make things complicated. If Teamable didn't start out as a complicated product, we wouldn't have had to do all this work of killing all these pages and reducing things and making them simpler. These are just some tweets from, I think it was Norgard was the head of product at Tinder. And he said, top product people practice reductionism. They take radically complex concepts and distill them down to the bare minimum. What is that bare minimum that you can ship? The sooner you practice reductionism, the better you'll be at product. He also says this, the best product people are reduction maximalists. And finally, a characteristic of a great entrepreneur is one who can quickly define customers they don't want using their product. I think that is it. Yep, that's all from me. And I think we hopefully have some time for questions and answers. I'll keep sharing the screen just in case there are slides that we want to go back to answer a question.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, for that. That was great. I absolutely love that last tweet you just read from Norgard. It's important to sometimes just, fire your customers if they're not the right fit, especially during the early days when you're still discovering different segments, right?
Right.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in. I'll start with this one. So how do you go about building a product mindset within culture among your colleagues, engineers, accountants? I think that's especially important as the company scales as well, right?
Yeah, I think a really good way of doing this is to be very transparent about what is going into your thinking. And so you do a bunch of customer research, you need to share the insights and share the learning with the entire company. Not in a way that's burdensome, but like in a very simple, light way, package it well, make it really easy to understand and to digest. You need to do something like, for example, saying, okay, everyone, these are our priorities. Does anyone disagree? Let's talk about it. Why do you think should number 4 become number 3? Let's talk about revenue. Why is revenue important? Why is it not important? And then get alignment. And obviously you should be open to inputs from your team. They also they know things that you may not know. Everyone covers a different base and everyone is exposed to different things that is contributing insights that may inform this prioritization. Once you do that, actually, let me do a more detailed example. Your actual backlog. Keep your backlog very transparent. And when someone says, hey, we should do this new feature, you say, okay, let me take this and then let's all together decide where it should go on this list. So this person initially came, and this happens all the time, this needs to be what we do tomorrow. This is number 1 priority. You say, okay, let's look at the priorities on the backlog. And is it really number 1? Is it more important than this thing? Usually they'll say, no, it's not. Is it more important than number 4? No. Is it more important than number 12? No. Is it more important than number 15? Yes, it is. Okay, then we'll put it at 14, for example. And so there needs to be a language that you communicate all of these things that everyone can have shared alignment on. And then together you can it avoids miscommunication. Data is sort of the universal currency that you can use if you were able to communicate it well enough with the rest of your team.
Perfect. Another question that came in from Karam. So he's asking, going back to the example of personas. So in your example, the hiring manager was the primary persona that you went with. So in the case where you end up with two, what you can say equal in weight personas, how do you go about it? Do you work on the commonalities between both, or do you still need to prioritize one persona over the other so as to not dilute the product focus?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think then there are probably a number of ways to do this. My initial reaction is to say, okay, to do something like this, what are the 5 things that persona A needs? What are the 5 things that persona B needs? And draw a cut line for each one, and then see if there's any things that are shared across. Oh, this person needs to connect accounts. This person also needs to connect accounts. Okay, so connecting accounts is clearly something that we have to get really well for both personas. And then you prioritize within the persona, what are the functionality that you need to make each persona successful, to make each persona happy. And so I would then say, so once you have these 2 personas that are competing, you would prioritize the building blocks inside each of these personas. And then your backlog would be item number 1, persona A and B, connect accounts. Item number 2, persona B, seeing the top candidates. Item number 3, persona A, doing something else. And you would have like, they would be, you would prioritize the individual components of each persona. Mm-hmm. That I'm sure there are other ways of doing it too. That's just the first thing that came to mind for me.
That's clear. Perfect. Question from Ahmad regarding the metrics. So how do you identify your key customer metric? So example, you go on a learning platform to learn a new skill and get a new job. So which here is the metric in the example of a learning platform? A new job. Yeah, I guess you can generally answer the first part of the question.
Yeah, I think so ask yourself a series of questions of why does the customer want to learn? They want to learn because they need to get a new job. Are most of the people, so let's go back to the personas, are most of the people that are on this learning platform looking to make a career shift? Are they looking to just be more successful in their job? Are they looking to get promoted, which is how they're more successful in their job, or a proxy for if they're more successful in their job? Let's assume that there are just those 2 personas, people that want to switch, people that want to get promoted. Okay, then you measure by what % of our users are switching or getting promoted. And so the actual metric is, what does the customer need our product for? Okay, they did this learning stuff, but what is the what is the objective for them for getting this? So for example, all of our competitors in the tax thing are doing accounting. And it's like, okay, why do people need accounting? Oh, because they have to file taxes. Or why are people doing accounting? Because they need to see how their business is doing. So let me just give you those things without doing the accounting. And so if you can get people promoted and get people to switch jobs without the learning, would you do that? The answer may be yes, the answer may be no. But the point is, what is the objective of what they're coming to you for? And then you define a metric that is aligned with their own incentives. And so you say, hey, if you discover that the primary use case is people that want to switch jobs, you say, hey, within 3 months of people using a learning platform, 80% of our users are able to switch jobs to the career path that they actually want. And so what are all the other things? It may change your product. It may not just be about learning. You may start introducing interview modules. You may start introducing a job board. You may start introducing connecting them to mentors that are in there. Like, that can define so many other activities besides just learning that you do.
Perfect. I've got a follow-up question on this, and it kind of ties in with a question we got in. So how do you think about, so this is your only metric that matters, right? The key customer metric. Then you've got a bunch of secondary metrics that kind of influence that or also have to do with product engagement. Is there a limit to the number of metrics that you get to choose as secondary metrics?
So you want to sequence them in a way, and I'm trying to find this. I'll try to find this thing. I have it. There's something called a fishbone metric. Here we go. these are not amazing examples, but I'm going to share my full screen for a second and show you guys. So there's something called the fishbone metric. The fishbone are basically input and output metrics. These are some examples. We'll see how good or bad they are. So you have this end, oh God, where is this? Okay, you have this end metric, and then you have all these input metrics that go into it. This is not a great example because usually these, so imagine that shooting mechanism has 3 other things that go into it, and hoop and backboard has 3 other things that go into it. So you have this end metric, and there are 2 things that go into it, shooting mechanism and hoop and backboard. And those 2 metrics have 3 other things that go into that. So it starts to look like a fishbone. That was supposed to be the point, but none of these examples are very good. And so that's, I'm trying to see if there are any other better. Oh, here we go. This is maybe a little bit better. So yeah. So this is, there are 2 things, or in this case, I guess there are 4 things that go into it, but each one has other things that are going into that. And so it's about what are the input metrics into an output metric, and those output metrics are input metrics into the next output metric until you get to the singular customer metric, if that makes. And then the ideal thing to do would be to say, these are the 4 input metrics that are most important into my company, into this output metric. If I have 4 co-founders, for example, I'm going to put 1 co-founder against each metric. And then hopefully you can do that. You can't always do that. It may be difficult, but you want to align the company around those metrics, because now you're best positioned to deliver the output. And you say, okay, Ahmad, you are responsible for inadequate UF time, and Lean, you are responsible for interdialectic, I guess, whatever weight gains. But like the point is, everyone becomes responsible for a metric. And I mean, this is a totally separate conversation, but or a larger conversation, but you'd want to equip that person to fully have ownership over that metric and ownership over all the things that drive that metric, so that Lean can't complain. Yeah, I wanted to, but I was dependent on Ahmad, and Ahmad wouldn't give me the things that I needed, and so I wasn't able to deliver. You want to structure it in a way where Lean has full autonomy to be able to deliver, the metric that she has.
I love this. Very clear framework. It just puts everything in perspective. Perfect. So I'm going to take one final question and we'll wrap this up. How would you fire customers that don't fit your product?
Oh man, that's so hard. It can be hard, but you should just keep in mind that they will find some other product to use instead. And so you shouldn't feel too bad about it. Here's the thing. Back to our product. So there are lots of businesses, as you know, that use one credit card, but some of the transactions are personal, some of the transactions are business. And so lots of products say, okay, I took your credit card transactions, but I want you to tell me which of these transactions are business and which of these are personal. No matter what kind of UI or UX that I come up with here, it's going to be a terrible experience. It's going to be like, okay, this was business, this was personal. Maybe I make swipes, whatever the hell I do, it's not going to be a pleasant or fun experience. And so what we decided is screw it. I don't want to ever have to deal with customers that don't have 2 separate credit cards, one for business, one for personal. I will not build a UI or an experience to allow people to separate out business versus personal. You need to come ready. And if you don't, I'm sorry, we're not going to serve you, because the only way to serve you is to build a shitty experience that I don't want to build. And I never want people to associate NeoTax with a shitty experience. So we're just not going to do it. And so we immediately, by doing that, we just fired a bunch of customers that said, hey, I'd like to use this, but unfortunately, the mechanics of how you actually fire can be different. The easiest is to say, hey, unfortunately, we don't currently serve this use case. We've added you to the wait list. We'll let you know as soon as it's ready. In the meantime, you'll have to use something else. Now, if they're already using, then you need to think of the easiest, the most graceful way of sending this customer somewhere else. So if they have a bunch of data with you, it's the right thing to do is to make it as easy as possible for them to take this data and put it somewhere else. The extreme version is, hey, we've built an API integration that allows you to take all your data and put it wherever else you need. That may be too much work. but hey, we make it very easy for you to download all your data. We assure you that we will delete all your data as soon as you tell us to. And we have made it very easy for you to transition to some other product. So gracefully failing is pretty important.
That's a great answer. I love the first part as well. Just let them leave you by not giving them what they're looking for, right?
Right, exactly. There's an article which I'm sure you guys have shared before. The founder of Superhuman, Rahul Vora, wrote this article about building like a quantitative method to find product market fit. And they basically, they put lots of measures and gates along the way to make sure that they were only acquiring the customers that they wanted. So they actually do an interview with you before you sign up. You may not decide to do this. This may be too much, but they do an interview to gate people before they even join. And there's some instances where they say, hey, listen, our product won't be a good fit for you. You should use something else instead.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Final wrap-up question from my end. What product resources do you recommend for people that want to get into product management, or just people you follow on Twitter?
Oh, I'm really bad at this. I don't have a good answer here, but I think in general, it is very likely that wherever you currently work, if you're not a product manager, you want to get into product, that there's a number of activities that you can help out with in your company that it's likely people are not doing, that can start getting you into the door. The number one thing that you should solve for is, how do I build customer empathy? At the end of the day, that's the only reason product managers exist, is to have a deep understanding of the customer and how the customer works. It's not to help prioritize, like, hey guys, let me help you prioritize your backlog. Hey guys, let me help you, like, none of that stuff is important. How do you help out with activities that are helpful for the company, but also for you, help you build the muscle of customer empathy? So not necessarily, you shouldn't just solve for how do I understand recruiters better. You should solve for how do I build in myself the skill set of understanding the persona. And in this case, the persona happens to be the recruiter. But how do I build that capacity to understand and to empathize with the customer?
Great.
That was really theoretical, but like, yeah, customer research, metrics, data, insights, more customer research, like all these things are going to be the best ROI for you.
Okay, well, I'm going to twist the question a bit. What's your favorite, what are your favorite books?
Man, you just keep asking great questions that I don't have good answers to. So I'm currently reading The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which I really like. And it kind of it suggests something similar to what I said at the beginning, which is like there's all these tools and things to help you when things are going really well, but they're useless outside of like real life examples, because real life is always much, much messier than like the clean, structured, organized example of that you can write in a book. And so Ben Horowitz in The Hard Thing About Hard Things talks about like really difficult situations where he had to lay off a bunch of people, or he had to pivot and sell off a part of the company. And all of these decisions sucked, but how did he prioritize, and how did he try to make the most optimal, not the best decision, but the most optimal decision given the constraints, given the real life situation, given that there were real people on payroll that had real families that had to put food on the table for their families. And so, yeah, like managing suboptimal conditions and circumstances is like the most actually real life valuable part. So yeah, if you haven't read it, it's a pretty famous book, so I'm not telling you something.
Yeah. Well, Ibrahim, thanks once again for joining. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was great to hear.
Likewise. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.